There are 8 prisoners on death row in the state of Idaho. Today we will see what crimes they committed and how long have they been waiting for their execution. Before becoming a state, Idaho instituted the death sentence in 1864, and since then 29 people were executed. Before being moved to the state jail in 1901, the executions were carried out at county level, and they were frequently public. The last hanging in Idaho took place in 1957. The jury must reach a unanimous verdict when the prosecution requests the death penalty. Even if one juror votes against the death penalty, a life sentence would be given in the event of a hung jury during the punishment phase of the trial. There is no option for a retrial. Azad Abdullah, 18 years on death row. Abdullah drugged his wife, suffocated her with a garbage bag tied over her head, and then set fire to their home. After he started the fire, 4 children who were in the house asleep managed to escape. Burns on his arms and the fact that the day before the fire he bought gas cans that were the same as the ones used in it were among the evidence put forth by the prosecution. Angie Abdullah and Azad had a rocky marriage, according to Police Chief Don Pierce, and Angie was actively seeking a divorce from him at the time of her death. A 19-month-old youngster was discovered in the backyard, still dressed in bedclothes, even though there were 4 other children inside the house when it caught fire. Pierce chose not to reveal how the boy is thought to have gotten into the backyard. The infant was saved by a neighbor, while the elder 2 youngsters managed to flee safely on their own. According to the neighbors, the kids informed them of the fire. Angie's body was discovered in a bedroom where it appears that she was murdered. Investigators failed to say which bedroom it was, but they claimed it wasn't hers. There were no indications of a struggle or a forced entrance into the house. Authorities found that gas was utilized as an igniter in the garage where the fire started, as well as in the other areas of the house that were completely destroyed by the blaze. Azad Abdullah, according to the police, first claimed that he and his 5-year-old son Redeer were visiting Salt Lake City for the weekend when the fire broke out. Late on October 5th, father and kid traveled back to Boise. The fire was set in the early hours of October 5th, and it was discovered that Azad was in fact in the city at the time. Azad and Angie Abdullah both had kids from prior marriages. Abdullah's first wife passed away many years ago, according to family relatives. Azad is now 46 years old. Thomas Creech, 47 years on death row. Thomas Eugene Creech received a death sentence after being found guilty of first-degree murder in the killings of Edward T. Arnold and John Bradford in 1975. When Tom Creech was accused of double homicide in Ada County, Idaho, he shocked his guards by confessing to 42 murders that he was accused of committing in 13 different states since 1967. According to Creech's statement, several of the murders were contract killings that were sometimes paid for by a biker gang. He also claimed that some of the killings were Satanist cult sacrifices. Several countries asserted that bodies had been discovered by following the prisoner's instructions, while some jurisdictions early rejected the stories as fiction. In 7 states, the bodies of 11 of his victims who were killed by being shot, stabbed, beaten, or strangled have been found. Research into Creech's admissions named his confirmed victims as Paul Schrader, 70 years old, in Tucson, Arizona, Sandra Ramsamug, 19 years old, of Salem, Oregon, William Dean, outside of Baggs, Wyoming, Rioli McKenzie, outside of Sacramento, California, and Vivian Robinson, outside of Sacramento. Creech committed another murder in 1981 when he was serving a life sentence in jail. The Idaho State Correctional Facility housed Creech. Dale Jensen, the victim, was a prisoner there after being found guilty of car theft. Creech is now 73 years old. Timothy Dunlap, 30 years on death row. In Soda Springs, Idaho, on October 16, 1991, Dunlap broke into the Security State Bank and committed robbery. Tonya Crane, a bank teller, was told to give Dunlap all of her money as soon as he entered the building. Crane did so without hesitating. She was less than 2 feet from Dunlap's sawed-off shotgun when he calmly and quickly pulled the trigger, literally blowing her out of her shoes. Police officers arrived right away. Tonya Crane was unresponsive when the officers arrived at the bank, and she was declared dead when she arrived at the hospital. Dunlap escaped the scene but later turned himself in to the police. He confessed to the murder and to a second murder that took place 10 days earlier after being read his Miranda rights. The next day, Dunlap revealed how he had arranged and carried out both killings. He is now 54 years old. James Hairston, 30 years on death row. When he was 19 years old, Hairston robbed and murdered a couple in their 70s at their Downey farmhouse. The judge thought Hairston got a high out of killing people and would do it again if given the chance. Court records state that before shooting the wife, Hairston shot the husband in the head as he sat at his kitchen table. He escaped with $30 in cash, credit cards, and pawned personal belongings. He is now 47 years old. Pausing for a second to give a shout out to this subscriber who commented on my video about Lisa Montgomery. Since you asked so nicely, there's your name and comment on the screen. Thanks for being here. Back to the death row inmates. Eric Hall, 18 years on death row. The state of Idaho handed down a death sentence to Hall for 2 separate homicides and essays. According to court records, Eric Hall killed and essayed a lady for the first time in 2000. 3 years later, he killed and essayed a second woman in 2003. The first victim was a flight attendant who was kidnapped and killed while she was walking along a hiking trail. She was dumped in the Boise River by Hall. The second victim was also kidnapped, subjected to essay, and then killed. Hall planned to bury her body in the Foothill region. Instead, he just dumped her there. Eric Hall was tried separately for the 2 killings, and he was found guilty in each case and given the death penalty. He is now 52 years old. Gerald Pizzuto, 36 years on death row. For the murders of Bertha Herndon, 58 years old, and her nephew Dale Herndon, 37 years old, at a remote cabin, Pizzuto received a death sentence in 1986. He was scheduled for execution on December 15, 2022, but it was not carried out due to the state's inability to obtain the necessary drugs for the lethal injection. Pizzuto has been receiving hospice care for more than a year. He has advanced bladder tumors, type 2 diabetes, as well as a number of heart and lung conditions. His medical records state that he has begun suffering memory loss and moderate disorientation associated with the death process. According to his defense team, he has received prescriptions for 42 different medicines in the past year alone. His severe childhood maltreatment was one of several mitigating circumstances. His brothers claim that while he was a boy, his stepfather routinely woke him up with a flashlight and a hunting knife, took him to a garage, strung him up with extension cords, and committed essay on him while demanding up to $20 from other adult men to commit the same crime. He is now 66 years old. Jonathan Daniel Renfrow, 5 years on death row. After being stopped by a Coeur d'Alene policeman as he was crossing a street where car break-ins had increased, Renfrow opened fire. His defense team contended that he never intended to kill the policeman, only to shoot him when he was wearing a bulletproof vest. Whatever had happened that day caused Renfrow's bullet to strike Officer Greg Moore in the face. According to testimony at a preliminary hearing, Renfrow, who was at the time on felony parole, had a stolen Glock pistol in his possession and was concerned that Moore would find the weapon and arrest him. After the incident, Renfrow also stole Moore's patrol car and weapons. He was subsequently discovered hiding nearby Walmart in Post Falls. Later that day, Moore passed away at Kootenai Health. Renfrow is now 35 years old. Robin Rowe, 29 years on death row. When Robin Rowe set fire to their Ada County home, she killed her husband and 2 children. She is the only woman serving a death sentence in Idaho. On February 10, 1992, a fire that started on the first floor of the apartment where Rowe's ex-husband and her 2 children were living resulted in the killings. As rescue services arrived at the scene of the burning building, they discovered the bodies of her husband Randy, their children Joshua, 10 years old, and Tabitha, 8 years old. The 3 victims died as a result of carbon monoxide poisoning. The judgment of the fire investigators was that the smoke alarm had been turned off and that a liquid accelerant had been used to ignite the fire. Rowe was the main suspect since she was living with friends. There were numerous red flags that identified her as the prime suspect. Sudden syndrome is believed to be the cause of the death of one of Robin Rowe's two additional children. Another child, a young boy, was killed in an unknown fire in California. After the boy's death, Rowe got $28,000 from the life insurance policy. Investigators found that Rowe had bought her husband and children life insurance policies totaling more than $250,000. She is now 65 years old. The Idaho Commission of Pardons and Parole is in charge of exercising clemency, and the only execution method permitted by law is lethal injection. Women are housed in the Pocatello Women's Correctional Facility, while men are held in the nearby Idaho Maximum Security Prison. Before joining the Union in 1890, Idaho executed 14 men, all by hanging. Between then and 1957, 12 more men were executed by hanging once more. Women have never been put to death in Idaho. Between 1957 and 1972, there were no executions because of the effective ban on the death penalty imposed by the United States Supreme Court's ruling in Furman v. Georgia, which overturned all death penalty laws nationwide. On July 7, 1973, Idaho established new laws, and the moratorium was repealed by the Gregg v. Georgia decision in 1976. Up until the Idaho legislature adopted lethal injection in 1978, hanging was the only execution method used in the state. The legislature added the firing squad in 1982 as an alternative to the lethal injection method. Since Idaho had never carried out an execution by firing squad, it was eliminated in 2009. This left just lethal injection as a means of execution. The Idaho Department of Corrections bought a mobile home in 1982 and converted it into an execution room. Keith Wells' execution in 1994 was the only time this was utilized. The state unveiled a new permanent execution chamber in 2011 and used it to put Paul Ezra Rhodes to death that year and Richard Albert Leavitt to death in 2012. Since then, the state of Idaho has not carried out any other execution. The official reason is that the necessary chemicals for the procedure could not be purchased by the state. Please hit that subscribe button if you like my channel. See you next time. Bye bye.